Okay, I'm already there. And you said that it's
Okay.
Oh, plugged in. Just gotta get the power cord.
Hi, Debbie.
There should be a power cord for this that I left out.
Hello. Yeah, we got on.
Well, we've already had a chance to greet each other, but I will give a big welcome from IFC. My name is Ann DeLore, and I'm the program director at IFC. And it's really good to see both familiar faces and some new faces among us today. We're really pleased to present to you this event today, which is the second in our Spring Interfaith Dialogue Series Online, addressing faith in this time of crisis. When we first envisioned this program, it was the beginning of the global pandemic, when the focus of our challenge was primarily on the threat of the virus itself. But as we gather here today, we're facing so much more than that. Racial, ethnic, and economic inequalities and political divisions have really come into sharper focus. And it feels like we're at a tipping point. Creating meaning has become all the more difficult as we struggle with how to live a purposeful life amidst this social chaos and an uncertain future. I'm led to ask for a brief moment of silence to hold the brokenness of our nation in the light. Thank you. When we come together in community to learn about and reflect on how our diverse spiritual beliefs can help address suffering, loss, and injustice, it can lead to hope and constructive action. I have no doubt that the three leader practitioners from distinct religious traditions who will be presenting their perspectives on creating meaning will stimulate deeper reflection for our small group dialogues. The format for the gathering today will be a combination of a webinar and an interactive meeting. And what that means is that the first part of our time together will include presenters speaking to you, the audience. After the three speakers, there will be a chance to ask questions of them. And in order to do so, we're requesting that you type your question in the chat window. And the IFC staff will scan the questions and pull out as many as we can to ask in the time that we have. Following Q&A, we'll move into the interactive portion. And during this time, you'll be broken into small groups where you'll have a chance to reflect and share around questions related to our topic. Those questions have been shared in the chat, and they also were included in the agenda that hopefully most of you received yesterday in an email that I sent to you. I've also shared that document in the chat, and you can click on it to download it if you'd like to do that. Once our small group dialogue session's over, we'll come back together and a representative from each group will have a chance to share something meaningful that came out of your discussion. Now, I have the pleasure of introducing you to our program moderator, Debra Linick. Debra's full bio, as well as the bios of all of our speakers, are included in the material that was emailed to you. So I'm not going to read Debra's extensive bio, but instead just let you know that Debra has had numerous leadership roles with regional interfaith organizations, including IFC. And she's currently the president of her Northern Virginia-based Jewish congregation, Kol Ami. She's a master facilitator, and I couldn't be happier that she's agreed to moderate this discussion today. Thank you, Debra, and let me hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Anne. I'm really glad to be here, and I'm going to follow your lead. We've got three great speakers hailing from different faith traditions. I'm going to keep their introductions brief so you can hear more from them. First up is Nadim van de Fliert. He practices his faith in the Baha'i tradition. He's a linguist, an urbanist, a youth mentor, and an avid soccer fan. And he works as a real estate development consultant and community development specialist focusing on affordable housing, educational facilities, and other community-based assets. Nadim spends much of his free time trying to build interreligious bonds of friendship like the program that we're doing here today. Nadim, I'm turning the floor over to you.
Thank you, Debbie. Good afternoon, all. I suppose I wanted to acknowledge you all for your presence here. I think at times like this, when the suffering of so many members of our human family is so acute, we often feel a sense of to stand up and also remaining confident in the supreme will and assistance of a higher power to which many of our traditions call us to submit. But I want to say that you being here is a powerful act, and I believe it's a very laudable effort in righting the many wrongs in society and collectively paving a conscious path forward. In this same light, my faith, the Baha'i faith, creates meaning by granting me initially knowledge, understanding, and wisdom on one hand, and then on the other hand, a very clear sense of purposeful action in this time of crisis. So firstly, my faith helps me to understand the current crisis in the light of religious history. History and religious history in particular has shown us that humanity is no stranger to calamity. Whether it's a great flood or plagues or wars, these are often seen as the signs of change, transformation, and regeneration toward a greater era of spiritual progress. There's a story that I vaguely recall, don't quote me on this. It's about a dream of an early Baha'i, and it harkens back to the great flood myths in many traditions. The dreamer stands on a rock in the middle of a raging river, frantically engaged in saving victims, plucking the masses one by one from out of the water before they're swept over this precipice. And the dreamer yells and implores a Baha'i holy figure in the dream to come and aid in this effort, while all the while hundreds and thousands are being swept away in this deluge. This holy figure hears the call, but remains engaged rather serenely and concertedly in building this great ark that sooner or later provides the lasting salvation for humanity at the brink. So I understand that the present day's travails are yet another manifestation of God's greater plan, and that building this ark that leads mankind will lead mankind inevitably toward a materially and spiritually reborn world civilization. So what does that look like? And this leads me to the second of the things that provide meaning for me, and it's a more practical aspect of how my faith gives me meaning. The Baha'i writings, in my study of the Baha'i writings, I understand that there are two simultaneous processes at play in the world as part of God's great plan. The first, I understand to be disintegrative, where a lot of the systems and ideologies that have at one point or another served humanity are falling apart. And the second process or force at world in the play is integrative. So I feel a tremendous sense of purpose and responsibility to work to hasten these integrative processes and these structures that we collectively need to build sooner rather than later to lessen the suffering of the effects of society's crumbling structures. So I, like many Baha'is, are called to action in building this ark of God in several ways. And this is not something unique to Baha'is. I think people of all faiths and traditions are working together to build this structure. So you know, the Baha'i worldwide community is learning to establish new patterns of community life that will sustain and give way to a spiritually and materially prosperous society. So even in these circumstances, I and my other Baha'is, I feel undaunted in efforts to engage in several lines of action. And especially, I think, despite Zoom and being able to connect with people all over the world, in our local communities, I think this is where resilience is built for how we can strengthen hope and resilience in the face of crisis and injustice. So firstly, I and all Baha'is, we are learning and aiming to multiply gatherings, in the current circumstances, families, smaller groups, or often virtual, that strengthen the devotional character of our local communities, right? We come together to pray, to grieve, to meditate, to reflect, and align ourselves with the greater divine will. And out of this prayerful reflection, many are inspired to then arise in service to friends and neighbors in one of several ways. I think one way that many Baha'is are engaged to act, to serve, is where groups of families and friends, decide to focus on the spiritual education of children. This is fundamental per aspect of religion, and I think that Baha'is and their friends are establishing these classes that are open to people of all faiths, where children receive this spiritual sustenance that enable them to grow and thrive and flourish despite what's happening around them. Another aspect is something that I'm very involved in and is very dear to my heart, is helping adolescents traverse a very pivotal stage in their lives, to help them understand their spiritual identity, their nobility, and to channel these constructive energies that are latent in them to service in their localities. And you know, this may look different in the present circumstances, but these groups of young people are continuing in their efforts to be of service to their communities, right? Recent examples in DC include, you know, the eagerness of these 11 to 14-year-olds participants to help in the relief efforts, to provide assistance to the needy. I mentor a group, and I check in with their families, and these families are an extension of my own, which has been really beautiful. And finally, you know, I've come together virtually with groups of friends from all faith backgrounds to study a series of scripture-based courses. You know, the Baha'i community, this particular curriculum is called the Ruhi Institute of courses that aim to strengthen our resolve to contribute to these integrative processes in society. And you know, together we often reflect together about how to be of service to our communities, which has been really beautiful. So all this is to say is that, you know, we've been promised God's kingdom, but it seems to be in the form of a make it yourself kit. So I'm encouraging all of us to join together to help build this together. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadim. I'm very appreciative, and as I hope everyone is on the call, that this is an opportunity to hear from our speakers, both their personal reflections and a bit about what their faith tradition and how their faith tradition is responding. So thank you for sharing that. Next up for us is Marie Berger. Marie is a Catholic writer, and she's author of Bending the Arc poems and senior editor of Sojourners magazine, where she provides a weekly column called The Hungry Spirit. Marie has worked in social change movements for 40 years. She's currently active in the Watershed Discipleship Movement and the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative. In addition to her writing and organizing, Marie has served in pastoral leadership and taught biblical literacy. Marie, thank you for joining us and for sharing your perspective from the Catholic faith tradition.
You're most welcome. When we're not meeting virtually, I try to begin by acknowledging the land on which we gather. And I think perhaps we can still do that. The land here in Washington, D.C. is the traditional Piscataway land, and it's held in trust by the Tyack family here in the Washington area. And so I just want to take a moment to remember that people have been caring for this land and the people here for thousands of years. And we owe them a debt of gratitude. And if you are in some other watershed, in some other, living in some other indigenous space, I hope that you know who the people are who lived in your area. I'm going to speak very personally about some of the things that I've been doing during the coronavirus time. But I first also want to acknowledge that my parents are on the call here. So I'm very grateful to have John and Barbara Berger here somewhere in the boxes. So thank you for joining us. So the coronavirus restrictions in DC came into full force the weekend in the Catholic tradition of the third week of Lent. And that's part of the 6 weeks of fasting and almsgiving and prayer in preparation for the celebration of Easter. For 2 years, my fiance and I have been planning to get married on the first Sunday after Easter. So this year's Lent was a time of joyful preparation for that also. However, the first very difficult decision we had to make was to cancel our wedding. And we had dreamed for a long time of finding a church that would marry us and a community that could celebrate with us. So it was very difficult. It was a very difficult decision to make, especially when we didn't know when to reschedule. And we still don't. But as I sort of began to understand the enormity of the pandemic, one of the first things that I did was to make what I called a roll of the dead. And I don't quite know how the mirrors work on this, but you can see it behind me, this piece of paper hanging on the wall. So it was a banner, and it says, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, who is the keeper of the book of life. Today we learned the death of..." And whenever I learned that someone had died of COVID or during the pandemic and was impacted by COVID, I put their name on the roll and the date of when they died or when I learned about it. And I say the prayer. And part of why this was so important to me was because I feared that I would hear of so many deaths that I wouldn't be able to remember them. And having this very physical practice helped me to honor each one that I learned of, but not beat myself up when I realized that there were some I was beginning to forget. As the season of Lent came to an end, it was clear that as a faith community, we would not be able to celebrate sort of our high holy days together of Good Friday, when Christians remember Jesus's state execution, or Holy Saturday, when we believe that Jesus went down into hell and brought out those who had been trapped there, or Easter Sunday, when we believe that Jesus rose from the dead and in doing so conquered our fear of death. And I've never, as far as I can remember, my parents may contradict, but I don't think I've ever missed an Easter Sunday service in my entire life. So on Good Friday, I was at home and I watched the movie Mary Magdalene, which if you haven't seen, I would recommend it. And I spent some time just sort of thinking about and praying with the women who were around Jesus and who are in the gospel stories. And on Holy Saturday, I made an Easter candle. I think my mom had led us in making Easter candles when we were small, but I hadn't done that for a very long time. And so with the beeswax candle, I drew the symbols of the Alpha and the Omega for eternal life. And I put in the 5 cloves for the 5 wounds of Christ. And I left it unlit until we could gather on Easter Sunday and light it with a new fire. And then, despite the coronavirus restrictions, very early on Sunday morning, 5 of us went from our houses in the semi-dark over to Malcolm X Park that looks down 16th Street in Washington, D.C. And we lit the Easter candle in the semi-dark. And instead of sharing bread and wine, we brought our decorated Easter eggs and we cracked them against each other like the good Orthodox Christians do. And we read resurrection stories and sang the Easter songs and gave our reflections with one another about what it was like to celebrate a bodily resurrection in a time of physical distancing. And all this while we were masked and gloved and standing about 10 feet apart. And then I took a flowering branch and I dipped it in clean water and I sprinkled us all with an Easter blessing. And we slipped out of the park a few minutes before the sun was fully up. And it was a lovely and certainly unforgettable Easter. As Nadim mentioned, I think one of the unique things that our religious traditions bring to us by way of meaning making in pandemic is that religious traditions have very long memories. We remember much longer than the 1918 Spanish flu. And as I've pondered that, you know, it's natural for us to ask, when has this happened before? How did people go through this in times past? And so for the Christian community, one of the first true pandemics was the Justinian Plagues in 544. And so I spent some time reading the journals of John of Ephesus, who was a chronicler of that plague. And he talks about his congregation being dead or dispersed. To anoint and bury the dead meant certain contamination. All worship was suspended. The normally scrupulous people that he knew were suddenly hoarding and stealing. And the rulers who had overspent on imperial expansion placed an impossible economic burden on those who had survived. So this ability to draw on a long history gives context and a sense of stability sometimes to the situations that we face today. And I think this is one of the gifts that the church offers, is this long memory. One delight, if I can say that, during coronavirus has been a small community that gathers virtually at 8 o'clock to say, pray Compline together, the evening prayers. And to just have our days, which can seem sort of out of time because our patterns are off, to have each day anchored in an evening prayer in community has been really a great gift. And then I think the central challenge that we've encountered, and this is common to many of us, has just been the inability to grieve and mourn and bury our dead. It's such a central rite in our religious traditions, and our grief deferred, I think, is just an open wound that we are all carrying. So at Sojourners, which is a Christian social justice organization where I work, in the last 2 weeks, we noted that as a country, we would be crossing over the 100,000 death mark this final week of May. And it coincided with the season, with the day of Pentecost for Christians, with Shavuot for Jews, I'm sorry, I don't know the Muslim name, but the receiving of the Quran for the Islamic community. And almost all of those celebrations have some component of remembering the dead. So that seemed a good time for us to not only pray in our communities in the ways appropriate to our traditions, but then tomorrow to call for a national day of mourning and lament. And mayors in at least 50 cities across the United States have said that they will do something at noon tomorrow, offer some sort of a time of prayer. Many people are putting empty chairs outside their houses with a photo or a name of someone who's died, and just taking pictures of them. In the Irish Catholic tradition, you know, the old women used to keen, that ancient sound of lament, of the women crying, but it's not weeping. It's an opening up of, it's a rending of a spiritual fabric that says something deep in our soul has died. And these women, the ancient keeners, they would not only acknowledge the death of one, but it sort of unleashed a new vision. How do we live as a community without these particular people with us anymore? And so I think part of what lamenting does is it opens a kind of prophetic imagination that allows us not only to recover from a virus, but to heal as a nation. And that's the kind of communal lament that we can be called to. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. I pause for a moment each time our speakers share with us. It's not that I'm not paying attention, it's that I want to really absorb, digest, reflect. I think we've had an opportunity to think of a long arc a calling to do it yourself in some ways, of the rich history that our traditions give us, and what is going on very presently as well, and what Rosemarie shared happening tomorrow. So I hope all these thoughts are reflecting for you as we hear from our last speaker, Dr. Rajwant Singh, who hails from the Sikh tradition. He is currently serving as secretary of the Guru Gobind Singh Foundation, which is a congregation in Maryland. And he's also founder and president of EcoSikh, a response from the Sikh community to the threats of climate change. He works beyond his own tradition, helping other faith communities transform their pilgrimage locations into eco-friendly environments through his Green Pilgrimage Network. And he's represented his tradition in numerous international forums and been invited by the Vatican and Buckingham Palace to serve as a representative. Nationally, he's co-founder and senior advisor to the Sikh campaign to educate Americans on Sikhs and Sikhism. The IFC is honored and privileged to call him a past president of our organization, and he will speak with us now. Dr. Singh.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts with you all. I'm just impressed by the previous speakers and how well-versed they are, and their, their roots in their own faith is very well reflected in their remarks. I'll try my best to present a Sikh perspective. We are amidst in many unanswered questions for all of us. What has happened with this pandemic, and what has happened to our nation in the last 1 week or last 4 days. But, the Sikh scriptures, which is written by many of the Sikh gurus, and the very opening hymn is called Japji Sahib. And the second hymn, after the founder of the faith gave the description of what is God, and there is no formation, so like a form of God. It's an expression. It's everywhere. It's omnipotent and omnipresent. But the second hymn, the founder of the faith talks about is the will of God, and he says, that everything happens in this entire universe is according to how God has created this universe, and it is a particular order through which this whole creation is operating. And hukum na keha jai. If I were to sit here and to describe why is happening, what is happening, and why is it happening, nobody can do it. And but at the end, there's a very beautiful twist to this whole notion. He says, Nanak mein je bujhe ta hum mein kahi na koi. That only those who reflect deeply upon this will of God and try to merge themselves and to really not question, but do their own part. Ta hum mein kahi na koi. The biggest threat to our meeting our Lord, our Creator, is our ego. Our ego tries to justify or try to logically try to understand what is happening and why it is happening, and we try to create our own ways to claim ourselves to be intelligent to answer things. There are many places where there are no answers. You just have to accept it. So, but then Guru also talks about that we just don't sit there and continue to philosophize and claim yourself to be a wise person. You have to act. So action is, what role can you play, whatever you are facing? And the answer again is given by the founder of faith. He says, Kaal khai kich hathon de, Nanak ra pachhane se. That those who really work hard And out of their own earnings and their blessings, they want to share with others, but without keeping any reward in mind. That if I do something good to others, I will find a place in heaven, or I will be treated better by my Creator. If you have that desire, Guru Nanak says, then the whole service has become a business. It's no longer coming out of your deeper faith or deeper love towards your fellow brother and sister. So loving others and caring for them and serving without any reward in mind is the foundation of the Sikh faith. And the founders of the faith made sure that whatever they were saying, they were preaching, they did it themselves to show the path. So I'm reminded about our 8th Guru, who was very young, and he was the leader of the Sikh faith. And while he was in Delhi at that time, we are talking about, this is close to 17th century, and there was a widespread smallpox, and the administration and the whole Mughal administration kind of failed. And this guru went around healing others, while in that whole process, he himself became a victim. His parting words were that, whatever you need to do, you do and part, but then at the end, we have to accept the will of God. And similarly, the 5th Guru, our 5th founder, also created a hospital for those who were suffering from leprosy. Again, to give us the guidance that we need to do whatever we can. And so getting inspirations from all those stories, and what my faith says is the 3rd major principle is to serve and to share your blessings with others. I felt that we need to do something here in Montgomery County while we were just beginning in the middle of March. So in the last week of March, we made a plan that we were going to start serving free food to those who are in need, and we started a program. And I'm just happy to report to you all that today marked the 37th day, and we have served close to 10,000 meals in Montgomery County, in Rockville area, in Maryland, various parts, in Silver Spring, to various homeless shelters, and to women's shelter, men's shelter. And volunteers gather every morning, 8 o'clock, we start cooking, and very lovingly, they are packed in individual boxes and packed in bigger boxes and then delivered to these shelters. And today, this was the first day we had food being distributed at the Sikh Center here in Rockville. And it was just so heartening to see many families with small kids drive up to this place to receive food. And I can tell you that I had tears in my eyes that that we are able to do some service to others. That these people, how challenging circumstances these people are facing when they have lost their jobs and lost any source of income and health insurance, and they are at the point where they even have to go and search for food. And how privileged we are that through us, God has been able to, act, and that we are a sort of a vehicle through which we can do some good to others. So, on one hand, we need to pray, Ji ki birta hoye, good pe ardas kar, that whenever you are feeling low, you feel, that you have no way in front of you, you have to do prayer. And prayer is an acceptance and surrender. And one of the hymns that we shared when we crossed the 100,000 mark, this was on Monday or Tuesday, we shared this with our fellow Sikh brothers and sisters all across the nation and asked them to pray this particular hymn and repeat. it again is, I'll just repeat that. It says, Kita karna sarbar jai, kich piche je kar sakiye. That all that happens and all that will happen is by Lord's will. Beyond the divine will, we have no power. By ourselves, we cannot do anything at all. As it pleases the Lord, He sustains us. Oh, my dear Lord, everything is in your command. We have no power to alter your will. Please keep us as you wish. So this is the sort of center of the Sikh belief system, that you have to surrender to God's will, but not just sit there, keeping your hands tied together just in prayer, but do something. Take action. Whatever ways you can offer yourself to others, do it. And I am just thoroughly impressed by how Sikhs throughout the nation, whether it's in Detroit, they've been going out distributing food to health workers in the hospitals. In California, the Sikh truck drivers have been serving food and giving food to other truck drivers on the highway. And there are health workers who are providing free advice and free medicine to clinics in the Sikh temples in many cities. And there's a Sikh temple in Los Angeles, which is serving 5,000 meals every day. And this has been going on for the last month and a half. And this has been happening all across the United States, not all just here, but all across the world. Even in India, where things are much worse and the need is much more. Sikhs have been going around sanitizing mosques, temples, and churches, risking their lives. And so this is the story of, my brothers and sisters. But on the other hand, how my faith is challenged. I'm being a health, in the health professional. I'm a dentist by profession. My office has been closed since March 13th. And there was a very challenging story in Montreal where a Sikh cardiologist who was treating patients decided to shave off his beard. And as you know, that the Sikh, in the Sikh faith, hair, unshorn hair, is a symbol of my connection to God and my connection to my faith. So this Sikh gentleman decided to shave off his beard. He says, I need to serve my patients, and this may not provide me the seal that I need to have to wear the masks. Now, this was a very challenging thing for many Sikhs, and especially all the Sikh health professionals all across the United States and North America who are doctors and working. So many Sikh doctors sent me their pictures of masks wearing them, while somebody is a cardiologist, somebody is in the emergency room working. So we had to spread this word, and there was a big article in many BuzzFeed and in places that, Sikh doctor had to shave off his beard to serve. But we wanted to say, hey, we can still serve without without sacrificing our faith. So there was you had to go through this a very challenging situation where you need to answer to your own youngsters and youth that, hey, there is a way. So many Sikhs got down to business and found innovative ways to really come up with a facial mask or to try to wear some sort of a PPE, which would not make us sacrifice our belief system and our faith and continue to serve. So it's a very challenging time, but at the same time, it is also a moment for us to really rise above many of our fears and to see how we can offer ourselves for service. And today, this afternoon, I had another challenge. My son and my daughter both said that they are going to join the protest in Washington, D.C. And, me and my wife were trying to say, hey, there's a pandemic going on. There's a you know, you have to be careful, but they said, no, we have to stand up for the African-American community. We have to stand up for justice. How can you talk about justice and not allowing us to go and participate in raising our voice and standing in solidarity with other fellow brothers and sisters in America.
Thank you, Dr. Singh.
So thank you so much. Really appreciate it for the opportunity.
Thank you. And my prayers are with your family and your children, that they stay safe at this time as they raise their voices. You've given us a lot to think about. I try to pause and digest because, again, I think that that we have a lot to reflect upon. And this is our opportunity to reflect in the large group. If there are questions, your chance to ask them. And the IFC has been guiding dialogues expertly for 4 decades. Is there anything that you'd want to share? I think you asked for people to write their questions in, or whether you've already received questions that, that you wanted us to be thinking on.
So I've been monitoring the chat, and let me check in with my colleague Alex just to see if there are any questions that have come in during the presentations.
One question that comes up is, it would be interesting to hear a bit more about the course that Nadim mentioned and what that is about. I believe he mentioned that it was open to all. So there was a question if he could elaborate on that a bit.
Sure. So the activities that I mentioned in the communities that Baha'is are sort of initiating, but they're really open to all people of any faith or no faith tradition. So the children's classes, again, are open to all. The junior youth groups, this is the spiritual empowerment of junior youth, those preteens between 11 to 14, 15 years old. And then study circles and courses for youth who are eager to help mentor or guide those just younger than themselves. So these middle schoolers, and then study circles that are open to all adults of any background. And these are the the Ruhi Institute courses, and really they allow us to. They're based on focused on the insights from the Baha'i scripture that allow us to feel a sense of the skills and knowledge to contribute to these activities in our localities. So if anyone is interested, again, they're open to all. We'd love your participation as we try to navigate the challenging times. And please reach out to me directly. I can provide my email in the link in the chat, or you can ask Anne or Alex or anyone to connect with me directly. And I'll be sure to connect you to a study circle or children's class or junior youth group or anything that you or those you think may be interested would like to join.
Thank you, Nadim. And do we have a question or two that's burning before we go into our breakout groups? I know we're a couple of minutes behind in doing that, and that'll offer another wonderful opportunity for folks to really absorb and reflect on what they've been hearing.
So there was another question, Debra, that was addressed to each of the presenters, asking if they could name a leader in their tradition that you look to for wise insight on our current context. I think that everybody commented on that, but maybe they could kind of summarize the essence.
That would be, so in our Jewish tradition, we have a story of Rabbi Hillel standing on one foot to give the teachings of Judaism, which in the Christian tradition is also very similar, the do unto others, or not to treat someone as you would not want to be treated. So with Alex's guidance, as you mentioned, a prophet or wise person from your faith, I would also ask you to take that idea from Hillel about just a 1 or 2 sentence essence of what that person conveys to you or inspires you. Let's go in the order that we started with in speaking. So Nadim.
That's a tough question. You know, I think the person that comes to mind was the religious figure in the dream that I described. This was Abdul Baha, who was the son of Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith. And, you know, Abdul Baha was a prisoner for 40 years, for most of his life. And, you know, the travails and afflictions and crises that repeatedly assailed, you know, communities that he was a part of, and also this worldwide Baha'i community, which he led and guided for many years after the passing of his father, really, you know, show the depth of his connection to the divine realms. And as Dr. Singh was describing, really aligning himself with the divine and understanding the subtler realities, the spiritual realities that are at play in the world. And through that divine connection, through that sort of spiritualization of oneself, was able to act in this physical realm with wisdom and understanding and love and compassion that was quite remarkable to me. So the figure of Abdul Baha in the Baha'i tradition.
Rosemarie?
I think I would choose a contemporary, which is Pope Francis of the Catholic Church, because he's operating, for the most part, I think he's operating with great wisdom in a time of incredible transition and trying to speak, trying to help us focus on the most important essences rather than many distractions, and doing it in such a way that brings humanity together within a loving relationship with the earth. And I think all of those things are important for helping us address and understand the times that we're in. So I'd say Pope Francis.
Thank you. Rajwant?
I'm really, you know, I have a deeper connection with the fifth founder of the Sikh faith, Guru Arjan, who was, after he completed the compilation of the Sikh scriptures in 1604, he was arrested and tortured to death. And these days are the days when we reflect upon his martyrdom. And one of the hymns which he recited was Tera kiya meetha lage, Naam padarth nanak mange. That whatever, you know, happens to us, we have to take this as a sweet will of our Creator. And there is a deeper hidden meaning behind everything which is happening to us. Which at a point when we are going through that experience, we may not understand. So we start complaining, and then we are not accepting, and we say, why is this happening to me? But in the mystery behind why this is happening is while he was going through the torture, he had recited this hymn. It just shows that we all just need to focus on what needs to be done rather than start, you know, going into philosophical sort of these discussions. And so be practical, be grounded here. What role can I do, play, and to really heal others and to be of some service. That's it.
We may not understand the wider workings of God, but we have an obligation to act. I hear some themes amongst our speakers today. I think we are getting ready to go into our breakout sessions at this point. Anne, if that's right, I think the instructions for the breakout sessions is that you'll be moving us into groups of 6 or less, so we really have a chance to talk with one another. That'll be going on until 5:20. The guidelines were sent with your agenda, and there'll be facilitators in most of the groups to help you work through. I think that Anne also just sent them again to everyone to receive. Your hosts will be able to receive, if you have questions, you'll still be able to ask them. If you need some assistance, we'll be there and able to move back and forth between your groups. Anne, are we ready to break folks out into their groups now?
Yes, we are. And let me just mention that we were able to identify in advance some facilitators for the rooms. Other rooms may not have someone who was identified in advance, but I just ask that somebody in the room take the initiative to be the facilitator for that group and just help the group to move through the questions. Our time is a little bit shorter than we had hoped, so if we could, you know, get to it right away. Once you're in your groups, you begin by introducing yourselves to one another. And then I would say that you can look at the questions 2 and 3 and decide for yourselves which one of those questions speaks most to you right now, and just have you try to address one question as a group. Or as individuals, choose the question that most speaks to you, so you don't have to worry about getting through all of them in the 20-minute time frame. Okay, folks, enjoy your discussions.
Welcome.
Back to the main
Mute
group.
You're supposed to mute yourself. He has to.
And I think folks are still making their way back in. If the breakout rooms, when the breakout rooms have closed, let me know and I'll welcome everyone back, but welcome to those who are with us already.
I believe everyone should be with us now who's still here. The breakout rooms have closed.
Fabulous. Well, I know that the discussion when we were all together was really enlightening, illuminating, and for me, thought-provoking. I hope that it gave you new ways to think about this difficult time we're in together, or resonate with things in your faith tradition that may have been affirming to you or supportive, or in some ways provided strength in a difficult time. Anne recommended that we do some popcorning now that we're back together. That's an opportunity to provide a word or a brief phrase, not really long sentences, of what you experienced in the breakout rooms. So so just a descriptive word, or if there was a real thought of the day that came out of that. We're going to read those out as we receive them from you so that we can each get a sense of what went on in the different breakout rooms we had. Laura, I like that, solidarity. So you felt a sense of unity in having that discussion. And Zilla wrote in hope. Unity despite separation. So we're in a virtual environment, but we can still find ways to be together. Creative adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
We addressed the racism. Love, justice, love in all caps. Absolutely. Unity and diversity, the study of many religions, mutual vision, service, kindred spirits, unity and sacrifice, knowledge, prayer and action. There was something that that my denomination did when we were in one of our larger meetings, and I'm going to just beg your indulgence for one moment. What we did, and if you're visual on the screen, you can do it with me and you can see what I'm doing. My hands are up on the side of my screen. And by doing this in a virtual way, I'm touching the person next to me. And I don't know if you'll feel it, but when we first did this, I watched the smiles on all of our faces in the screens, and just found that I felt some sort of connection. And I wanted to just share that connection with you. Mm-hmm. And then in a sign of respect and thanks,
Namaste.
bring us back together.
Mm. Thank you so much, Debbie.
Thank you.
I love all the descriptors that people used for their experiences in their group. It's very hope-filled and connecting. So I want to recognize a few people on the call if they're still on. Our executive director, Rabbi Jerry, was on. Jerry, are you still there? No, okay. We also have with us Tony Quainton, who's on our board. Tony, are you still with us? Welcome, Tony.
Yes, still here.
Wonderful, good to see you. And we have Dr. Shiva Subramaniam, who is also one of our long-term IFC leaders, and we're grateful to have you, Shiva.
Pleasure.
And also I'd like to recognize Casey Caseman, Reverend Casey Caseman from Montgomery County, faith group leaders, who I believe is still on the call. Reverend Casey, are you still there? Wonderful. Well, I know that I'm deeply enriched by the sharing of what's been in our midst, the sharing of their time-tested rituals, our narratives and practices of our diverse traditions. And maybe most of all, what I come away with is a felt sense of being connected to others who are also striving to live a values-based life at this unique moment in history, and I hope you feel that too. As we close out the gathering, I want to thank our speakers again, Dr. Rajwant, Rosemarie, and Nadim, for sharing your perspectives and catalyzing our reflection, and also to Debra for facilitating the program and helping to synthesize some of the content for us. Also, my colleague Alex, who helped with the Q&A time, And we really appreciate you joining us today for this program. We'll be offering our third dialogue on June 14th. It will be similar in format to this, but the theme will be bringing presence to those most vulnerable. And in that event, we will hear from 3 speakers who are working on the front lines of the pandemic. And they'll be reflecting on that experience from their spiritual tradition. So I believe that will also be a very enriching conversation, and I hope that you can be part of that. As we close out, let me just say that you'll be receiving an email from us, which will include a link to the video recording of this, in addition to a quick follow-up survey so we can hear about your experience and learn how we can continue to provide meaningful experiences like this in the future. And we're always looking for new ideas and ways to improve. As we close out our time together, I offer peace to all of you in your bodies, minds, and spirits, and may you and yours stay safe and be well.
Mm.